So, welcome everyone to our Study Abroad podcast series. So, today we have Jayati from Germany. So, she's from Bangalore and we'll be knowing about her journey from Bangalore to Germany. So, welcome Jayati to our podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
Sure, sure. Pleasure is on both sides, probably. Okay. Okay. So, Jayati, we have some set of questions that we'll be asking you, and then branching from there, we'll have some cross questions also, probably. So, Jayati, when was the very first time during your school or college that you thought that you should go abroad or you wanted to get this abroad exposure in your life?
Oh, I think that would be early in my bachelor's. So the idea was I was doing a bachelor's in maths, economics, and statistics, and I always wanted to do research, and I was trying to look at master programs because in India, if I had to do a master's program, then I would have to prepare for all of those tests, and I was trying to figure out which tests to prepare for, or if I want to go to US, maybe I should be giving GRE or so on and so forth. And I was just looking at a lot of different master programs, and that's when I really thought about maybe I should try looking abroad as well.
Sure, sure. And you would still have to write some tests for abroad education. So, whatever the test you went through, like GRE, TOEFL, IELTS.
Actually, luckily enough, the first time I went through the process, I did not have to give any tests because I decided to forego US, and so I didn't have to write any tests for the states. And when I was looking at Europe, I had a couple of my seniors also apply to places in Europe, and I was going off of their experience as well. And then the way that it often works in Germany is that things are very university specific, and the places that I applied to just did not require any tests, so I just got lucky in that way.
Okay. So, you directly got the offer from the college after the online application.
Yes, exactly.
So once you got the offer, I mean, did you consider any other college or just like one or two college you applied? How many roughly you applied that time?
The first time I applied to exactly one, and I got through. The good thing was I still had time, so the place that I had applied to first also had really, really early application. I think for the winter semester, which starts in October, I had already sent in my application in something like March, and the other colleges hadn't even started their application process yet. So by the time the other colleges were getting near their deadlines, I already knew that I'd gotten into the first one that I'd applied to. So I actually didn't need to apply to anymore.
Okay, but that's good. Good to know. You applied to one and you got through one. And once you got the admit offer, etc., you had to go through visa, accommodation, and flight booking. Which of
Yes.
these three were like the most troublesome for you?
Uh, First time around it was quite easy. I think more recently the visa was quite troublesome because now the process has become quite awful. I would say it's not easy at all, especially with the APS and everything. Uh, the visa itself was quite troublesome, but beyond that, other things were pretty straightforward.
What about your accommodation, initial accommodation? Where did you book and how did you do that?
If you talk about my more recent experience, I was in Munich, and accommodation there is very hard. I applied for student accommodation. I got back an email from them saying that the wait list is 3 semesters long, and my entire program is like 4 semesters long. So it's a little ridiculous. So I had to look for other accommodations. In fact, for I think almost 2 months, I was living like a nomad. I was just living out of hostels and hotels where I just book a room for like a week and then travel back and forth. So I already have some family in Germany. So if I had a long weekend, I would come home for a little bit and then book another hotel for another week. It was pretty stressful till about Christmas, and then I got a shared accommodation. But in other cities, it's different. The accommodation is hard everywhere now, but it's a little bit easier if you're in a slightly smaller city. It gets harder in Berlin, Munich, all of these bigger cities. The accommodation gets harder.
Okay, so probably Germany is getting more and more famous. More students are joining, so
Oh,
accommodation are getting good.
absolutely, yes.
And you probably have seen this wave of students up and down probably.
Yes.
Okay. So, and the flight, the very first flight, did you take from Bangalore to Munich, or how was the flight experience like?
Um, my flight actually I took from Ahmedabad to Frankfurt, which is not the norm, but my parents at the time were living in Ahmedabad, so I chose to travel from there. And then, like I said, I have some friends and family near Frankfurt, so I landed here. I stayed with them for a bit before I went to Munich. That's not the case with most people, though. Like, they would land at the Munich airport and they'd probably book a hotel somewhere there.
And you had family that time also in Germany, some relatives.
The first time that I came, no, but I had friends. So a couple of my seniors had applied, and one in particular, she was in the same university that I was going to. So she really helped me out. And I think even back then, and especially now, there is a huge diaspora of Indian students in all major universities. And it's quite easy to connect with them, and we all help each other out wherever we can. So the community is quite vibrant and very helpful.
So, when the first time you took the flight, was that your first international flight, or you had taken international flight before as well?
Uh, I'd say that was my first international flight. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So once you landed in Germany and you saw the, let's say, the culture, the educational system, the people, what were your initial few surprises that you would compare, let's say, back to India? Like as an Indian student, what are the first few things to notice and get adjusted to?
I think the something that I still notice a lot is just how not crowded Germany seems to be. Like, it's very empty all the time, especially if you happen to be in a smaller city. It's also something that I've heard from a lot of other friends and students, where because a lot of these universities are located in smaller towns, and they are just sometimes so empty. It's something that I still haven't gotten used to, and I've been in Germany for a cumulative of like 6 years almost.
So
But
you're saying,
beyond that, I think, yeah, that's a big culture shock, because even when I was first coming to the Frankfurt airport, a lot of people told me, "Oh, it's a really big airport. There'll be a lot of people. Don't get scared." And I was traveling via Delhi airport. Frankfurt seemed tiny.
yeah, sure, sure. And so this is like, like this shock is like coming from the metro probably that let's say you come from Ahmedabad or Bangalore airport, you would have
Yes,
seen it very, very crowded. And then once you went to Germany, maybe you are not at the that big airport or that big of a city. So the crowd that you are used to because of the Indian population, so the population also matters.
exactly.
And then you are in a small city, right? So small city has to be compared with a small city maybe, but you compared maybe a metro with a like a village of Germany.
Maybe, but even villages are more happening in India. Like, I've been to some village towns as well, and that also definitely more happening. There's just more people around.
Sure, sure. What about the language barrier, like small cities, especially or small towns? Was there any problem with the language, German, English?
There is some problem always. So I also spent 2 months studying German. We had a intensive course, so we used to just study German from morning 8 o'clock to like 3 in the evening every day for 2 months, except the weekends. So I was able to pick up the language a little bit. And then during my studies, I also studied more German. The initial days were a little hard. I think university towns people do tend to adapt a little bit. A lot of people will speak English, especially within the university. And big cities is not too much of a problem. Like in Munich, I don't find that I need a lot of German for my day-to-day things. But in Kaiserslautern, yeah, knowing some German definitely really helped. And if you're gonna travel around Germany, which I highly recommend anybody to do, then knowing some German really helps.
Sure. So I see that after your first master's, you probably went back to India and worked as like a professor in a university, and then you
Yes,
decided to a second master's. So what was
yes.
this? How was this decision in your life? Like, that after the first master, you should go back and then maybe like get into teaching line and then a second master's. So what was the motivation fluctuation like for these two career paths for you?
So I've always really enjoyed teaching, and I always wanted to. I still want to get into research, so I would like to do PhD. I would like to maybe do a postdoc or maybe some industrial research as well. And back then, I was specializing in algebra, which is uh, as far from industry as you can imagine. And even back then, my motivation was research. But by the time I graduated, it was the height of COVID. We were seeing the second wave of lockdowns, and I was just stuck in Germany. I wasn't sure what I'm doing or what the next steps might be. So I just thought, while I'm still trying to figure it out and while COVID is still going on, I should just come back, live with my parents for a while and figure out what my next step should be. And I was still applying to jobs, I was applying to research positions when I got the teaching position in Bangalore, and that aligned with my interests already. So I decided to take that up.
Sure, sure. And when you came the second time, what were the main differences that could you see? I mean, were you able to see some differences, Germany then and now kind of thing? Any surprises?
The application process has become much harder, I'll say that. It's not easy. It's much longer. It's much harder. It's way more expensive. Like this time, I had to do an IELTS, which I didn't have to do previously. I had to apply for an APS certificate, which was also not a requirement earlier. And the visa process itself was a little bit harder, especially since now you have to go through VFS. You don't directly do it at the embassy. So that was a little confusing for me, especially since it wasn't exactly clear where I can even apply for a visa. So, for example, I wasn't able to do it from Ahmedabad, which is where I was when my application results came through. So, to travel to Bangalore and then apply for a visa from Bangalore. So, yeah, these processes have become more elaborate, much more difficult, uh, but I think it's just a product of our times, I guess.
So what about the class demographics? Did it also get more skewed towards international student like then and now?
I think that really depends on which class you're in. So even back then, the RPTU where I was at, they had a course. I think it's still there. It's called CVT. So people do masters in commercial vehicle technology, and that is a very skewed demographic towards Indians. I would say we used to get 50 to 60 Indians every semester, so twice a year for that course. Whereas the course that I was doing, there was just one Indian, and that was me. And totally, there were three internationals. It got better with time. I think 3 years down the line, we had about 5 or 6 Indians doing MSc Maths. And then there were a few more other internationals as well. But way back in 2016, there were three international students in my program.
Sure, sure. And what about the class size? Like current class size? What kind of class size you have?
That again depends very highly on what course you happen to be doing. So, for example, right now I have some courses which are mandatory. So, basic things like statistical inference or supervised learning and so on. So, these are mandatory courses, and they often have a class strength of something like 30 to 40 students. But then we also have specializations within each master's, and some of my specialized courses have maybe 7 kids in a class,
Sure,
and
sure.
that's like already a big class if you have 7 to 8 kids showing up.
Yeah. What about the cultural difference in terms of education, the way things are taught by professors, let's say in India versus Germany, from your point of view?
I think the education system itself, there's a lot more freedom in some sense. There's a lot more independence. Like in India, I remember the need of having to go to classroom. Even when I was teaching, there was this rule of having 75% attendance. Even for master students, that was a thing. Uh, and then the whole dependence on a teacher for telling you how the exam is going to be, or having notes available, or whatever, so on and so forth. That's not something that I see here at all. Like, I could spend an entire semester not showing up to a single class, and nobody will care. I could potentially never submit an assignment, and nobody will care. Nobody's going to come behind me and say, hey, you didn't do this. And as long as I show up to an exam and perform well in an exam, in some ways, that's all that matters. So I see that a lot more responsibility is on the student. It's not that they will not help you. If you ask for help, they will make sure that you get that help. The professors are always really nice like that. The TAs are always really nice like that. But they will also not ever come behind you and say, hey, look, you need to do something.
So no chasing. It's like you have to chase yourself.
Yeah, you have to chase yourself. Like, the responsibility is completely on you. Like, they're very nice. They will always help you. I have never been in a situation where I needed help in a subject and I reached out to a professor or a TA and they said no. They always, even if they're busy, they will make sure they find somebody who can help you. But that being said, they will not come behind you.
Sure, sure, sure. And what about this cultural difference of cooking, cleaning, laundry that people have to do by themselves versus in India when you can have all the helps with you? How are you
I
adjusted to
think
that?
that was definitely a little, it required a little getting used to, but it's not terrible. It's not so difficult. Requires a bit more planning, I would say. So it forces you to be more mindful about certain things, especially like things like, for example, on a Sunday everything is closed here, so you're not getting any shopping done because all the shops are closed. You're not able to travel too much because public transport is at half the capacity. You can't do a lot of things because, again, it's a Sunday, nobody's working. So if you have to do your grocery shopping, you have to make sure that by Saturday evening you have everything you need. Or if there's a longer public holiday, everything is going to be closed. You're not going to get anything done. So if it's like a 3-day weekend for some reason, you need to make sure ki by Friday evening you did everything, because once that's over, it's over. Nobody's going to, there'll not be any shops open, there won't be anybody working, and you're just stuck at home. So it definitely forces you to be more mindful. Or like, for example, I had 8 a.m. classes in the morning, and then I had to figure out lunch. So I used to like prepare something at night that I could carry and take with me to the university, because I know in the morning I won't have time, which was definitely a lot easier when I was in India as a student. I didn't have to plan so much or think about that many things.
Did you ever did this kind of a hack that cook once and eat like 5, 6 times or 5, 6 days or 3, 4 days?
Personally, I did not. I find I'm a little spoiled when it comes to food. I get bored easily. So I don't like repeating meals, but definitely I would do things like, acha, raat ko I made dal and roti, so I will just make enough dal so I can make rice in the morning, something like that.
Sure. And there is no placement cell or like nothing like a placement department in most developed countries, including Germany.
Right.
So which means you have to do your own job hunting, internship hunting, part-time job hunting. So in your
Oh,
experience, how
absolutely.
was this? How is this happening for you?
Uh, right now, I'm trying to hunt for part-time jobs. It's not easy, I will say. Um, just the application process again, it's changed so much. Like for every part-time job I applied to, I'm having to write cover letters for each of them, and it's a process. And companies also take a while to respond to you, and you have to check if there are positions, and there really is no shortcut to any of it. I think one thing that does help is there are often university job boards. So companies will post their ads specifically at university job boards that students have access to. So that helps in finding open positions at least. And there are also job fairs that happen at most universities where a lot of companies will come and advertise their jobs. So those are sometimes ways to get internships. But beyond that, there really isn't a shortcut. There isn't somebody who's helping you out with any of this. It's something that you definitely have to just do on your own.
What about the RAT, the research assistantship and teaching assistantship under professors? Is that an option in general or not so much?
As a general rule, that's an option. It highly depends on availability, though. So, for example, most TAs are often PhD students, so that leaves very few positions open for a master student. But it changes quite a bit depending on the subject and so on. So, for example, my last thing, even right now, I'm working in a slightly more theoretical field. So, there tend to be slightly fewer jobs just because a lot of the load is carried on by a PhD student or postdocs. But I do see, at least with my friends' experiences, that if you're working in experimental places, then a lot of labs will have jobs for master students as well. So that is a difference that I have noticed. But in general, most labs will have some opportunities. They've gotten less over time, I've seen. They're not as abundant as they used to be. I think it's also a function of just more students coming to universities. Uh, and, the lab positions have not kept up, so they're not increased in proportion to the number of students, I think. But yeah, in general, those are possibilities. They're just specific to availability. Like if it's open, your chances are pretty good. If the professor doesn't have money, you're just out of luck.
And it's advertised that Germany doesn't need any tuition fee as such. There's like a full 100% kind of scholarship for the tuition fee. Is
Mhm.
that fully correct, or is there is a bit of a TNC involved here?
There is a bit of a TNC involved. Most public universities are still tuition free. So that came with the caveat that you did have to pay something called as a social contribution, even back in 2016. But that wasn't too much. Like I used to pay something like 200 euros per semester, and that comes with so when you pay that, you get your ID card, and that comes with certain benefits. So, for example, back then with my student ID card, I could use most public transport for free, and I got the cafeteria food at a subsidized price. And just with my student card, I also got a lot of other freebies and discounts. Like me and a friend, we went to Paris for a visit, and just because I had my student ID card, I could go to most museums without an entry fee. And even now, like a lot of museums in Germany, I can go to at a reduced fee because I'm a student. uh, So you did have to pay the social contribution, but you didn't have to pay a tuition fees. However, now this is changing. So some states now have tuition fees for universities. So Baden-Württemberg is one, and so places like Heidelberg now have a tuition fees. And in fact, I think starting this winter semester, TUM is going to have tuition fees, and I think in the next year also LMU will have a tuition fees. So this is something that is definitely changing and something that future students will need to be careful about.
So it will be like a case by case basis, like some people might get 100% waiver, whereas some might have to pay the 100% of the fee, whatever they want.
So it was never a waiver. It Places just did not have a tuition fees. So you can still apply for scholarships, but tuition fees is just a separate thing. It was never that there's a tuition fee but they waive it. It was just that there was no tuition fees. And now there is a tuition fees in a lot of universities.
Probably they realize that, if they don't charge any fee, people are not that serious, maybe.
I don't know. I
Just a
wouldn't
gut
comment
feeling.
on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I see is, a lot of colleges use this, that they have a bit of a tuition fee, but then they also have scholarships. So eventually, it becomes a even thing for them, but there is still a financial transaction between them. When things are
Yeah.
free, there is no transaction as such. So it becomes like a barter deal to both the
I
parties.
mean, there was still always scholarships that you could apply to, but earlier that scholarship money would have gone to your living expenses. Like, just because you're not paying tuition fees doesn't mean you didn't need the money, right? Like, you still had to pay rent, you had to buy groceries. So all of the scholarship money was going to living expenses. And now, if you apply for a scholarship, it will go to tuition fees. So
You
it
will
will
go to
still
tuition
cost you
fee
more.
also.
Well, that depends because I think so for something like Heidelberg, if I read correctly, the tuition fees is something like 1,200 euros per semester, which is not exorbitant, but I think TUM in Munich is planning for a tuition fees as high as like 4,000 euros a semester. So we will have to see where they go with this.
Correct. Now there might be a competition on this tuition fee. Who will charge more or who will charge less?
Exactly, exactly.
Sure, sure. Okay. So, Jyoti, coming to the very last two questions now. What are your future goals? What do you want to do in the next 2, 3 years, 4 years from now?
2, 3, 4 years from now, my immediate future goal is to finish this master's well. So I'm looking at internships, I'm looking at thesis options. We'll see where that takes me. Beyond that, it really is my dream to do research in healthcare. So currently, I'm specializing in biostatistics, and my aim really is to focus on data science and AI in healthcare. So, with that goal in mind, I really would like to either do a PhD at a really nice university where they're doing some good work. So, cancer research is one possibility, and they're also doing a lot of imaging work. So, those are possibilities. There are possibilities in public health. So that would be ideal. If not that, I would look for industrial PhDs where people are still working in healthcare and doing research. So there, the ideal thing would, for me and my interests, would be something like either good drug development or maybe better clinical trial research or things like that. So
Correct.
that is briefly where I hope the next 3 years will take
So you
me.
want to land up in some kind of research oriented career.
Yes, yes. Like, I think my ultimate goal in life would be to have my own research group.
So that is like you become a professor kind of thing, and you
Kind
have
of, yeah. Like, it doesn't have to be in academia, it can be in industry. But that would be ideal.
correct, correct. Okay, so coming to the very last question, what pro tips or advices would you have to some juniors who might be thinking about doing masters from Germany or LMU to be specific, I mean, Munich to be specific?
Munich, to be specific, I would say it's one of the more expensive cities. They should definitely keep that in mind. It's, even the housing and so on is a little bit on the expensive side. So I'm not saying don't come, I'm not saying there are no jobs, I'm just saying it is something to plan for. It's a great city, it's a nice place to live in. It's just something that you need to think about when you plan. uh, Germany, I would just say research your universities, because each university has very different requirements even for similar courses, and you end up needing very different things for different programs. So research which program you're applying to and research that university. So that would be like the biggest tip. There is no one generic way of applying to places in Germany. So yeah, the biggest tip would be to research the university that you want to go to. And finally, the other tip would be that people often get caught up with these QS rankings and so on. It's good to go to like a famous university, but I think with Germany specifically, you really can't go wrong with public universities. So if you are applying to public universities, chances are it is a pretty good university that they're still doing good research there. So you don't have to get caught up in this, oh, it's either the first or nothing else. As long as it's a public university, you're still doing well for yourself. So those would be my tips.
Sure, sure. So, thank you, Jayati, for your time and sharing your insights and advices to our audience. And we hope some of them might be getting some benefit from you, and probably some of them might be connecting with you through LinkedIn or something. So, as we'll be uploading this video on YouTube and LinkedIn, so feel free to help anyone whom you think you can help.
Oh, absolutely. Like I help or try to answer as many questions as I can all the time. Like people message me on LinkedIn, people message me via email, and yeah, sometimes I get caught up with exams and studies, but I do try to answer as much as I can. So
Sure,
I'm
sure.
I'm
That's
happy
very
to
good.
connect with anybody who might want to.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Jayati. Then have a good day. Bye.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good day.